I've never told this story in a public forum like this. I was investigating a foreclosure on a street that was not a good neighborhood. I saw this cat rolling up the street on a pink Huffy, had a chain around his neck, in one hand a sickle or a scythe, his other hand had bolt cutters, trying to climb this hill where I'm parked going into a house. Note to self, go into the house, lock the door, pay attention when you leave. When I came out, that cat was leaning on my truck. He said again, I need $9. And finally, the fourth or fifth time, Jamie, he said, I need $9. I have 4 children to feed. The other voice in my head, which is that sonar, that heartfelt voice that said, just help him. I go, here's 10 now. Can I leave? I've got some appointments. Jamie, that dude's eyeballs went from freaking bloodshot, bugging out of his head to crystal clear, looked me square in the eye, and with the clearest voice I've ever heard in my life, he said,
so here's what I got. Your mother gets pregnant with you in Austria. You then move to Georgia. Your Austrian father and your mother move to Georgia. Divorce by the time you're 2, and you don't even know who this guy is. He moves away. Your mother remarries. Your stepfather adopts you because your mother strong arms your biological father that you don't know. This is the beginning. Let's see if I get the rest of this. This is crazy. Your stepfather, or your father, I guess your adopted father, then divorces your mother and marries the neighbor, your mother's friend. Your mother at the same time informs you she has cancer. So you move in with your adopted father. You learn and hear the conversation how they don't want you. So you end up going to military school, which your mother, who now lives in Venezuela, somehow pays for. If you're listening right now, try to follow this. Okay, so mom's in Venezuela, okay? Your mom then, I think, remarries or has another man in her life. You move with him to Massachusetts. He ends up going to jail for something financial. I don't know what exactly. Tax evasion, something to that extent, it sounds like. Yeah. So now you're in with your grandparents, if I'm not mistaken. And eventually you end up moving to Venezuela, come back with your grandparents, and I think I got us to 18. Yeah, what did I miss there?
17. Yeah, you're right. That's impressive. I mean, there's a lot of, so the first 100 pages, maybe 90 pages of the book sort of lay this story out. And the purpose in sharing the story is I want to be relatable. And I don't think people relate to data points, and I don't think people relate to charts and graphs. They relate to stories that resonate. And I think we've all got a story that we're telling, either that we've lived or we tell ourselves, and often one and the same. And the idea is clarity around today isn't determined by yesterday or my history. And so I had a wacky story, man. I went to 10 schools through 12 years, including a year in boarding school when I was 12, which was horrible. I felt unloved and unlovable. And then from there, my mom was dating a guy who was an international businessman. He was setting up offshore corporations so that corporate, companies in America could basically offshoot money so they could avoid taxation. And it was all technically legal in that there were loopholes, but it backfired. And he ended up spending 5 years in prison, unfortunately. But I did live with him for 2 years in Massachusetts under the assumption my mom would eventually move back, because I met him while visiting an island in Curacao, actually, or Aruba, I think it was. And my mom was working there off the coast of Venezuela. She did, in fact, depart my life at 10 when my stepfather divorced her and he married her friend. She divorced her husband. It was the Brady Bunch, honestly, a wild story. And so that only lasted a couple of years before things got unsettling and I started bouncing again. And he did go to prison, which took Massachusetts off the table after 2 years, 7th and 8th grade, 9th grade, and part of 10th. I lived in Athens with my grandparents. There's a whole story about my grandfather and my grandmother who lost her leg, escaping communism and in a train station where she was run over by a train when the Allied troops started bombing. That's a cool story. And the point is, there's 1,000 ways my story could have ended up completely shitty and completely off course. And I just decided one day that, one, I would forgive people who made choices that were not in my favor, but were just circumstantial relative to where they were and what they were doing in their own trauma. And the other thing I decided is that life's for me, not against me, and that these perceived curses were really gifts. And I just flipped the script on how I was going to take the lesson from it and make something good and not let it define me.
When and where was my question on this? Did that decision come? When did you decide to stop settling, essentially? What was the moment? Do you remember a moment? How old were you? What was it that did that? Dive into that if you don't mind.
Oh, I have perfect clarity. So until I was, remember, 16 years old, I'm living in Athens, halfway through 10th grade. You know, most people take a gap year off from college and go travel abroad somewhere. My grandfather walked in one day and just decided he was done having me there. And by the way, I wasn't really a bad kid. Like I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't partying. I hadn't had my first beer. He just had a low tolerance and was a difficult person and saw me as an interference, if you will. But he came in midway through 10th grade and said, "Hey, you're going to go visit your mom for a while." And I was like, "Well, I'm midway through the year." And he's like, "Yeah, I bought you a ticket. You're leaving next week." I'm like, "Okay, all right." Now I'm 16 and I don't really have a backup plan. Everybody, my other family units, if you will, had all sort of pushed me out and I'd gone different directions. And it was all circumstantial divorces and separations and moves. And anyway, the story's complicated, other than I went to Venezuela. And I was there for a full year, Jamie. And in that year, my mom didn't live in like the cool part of Venezuela, which would be like Caracas, where there's a city and lots of urban action and modernization. She met a guy who was a farmer and they lived in the Andes Mountains. And I mean, way into the Andes Mountains, where the little town had 3 streets and strung lights. Um, I was like Elvis when I got there. That was the weirdest thing for somebody. You know, I wasn't really self confident. I mean, obviously I'd bounced so many times. I mean, how can you feel lovable when you keep getting pushed to someone else? It just the innateness of that experience. So when I got there to go down into the village and people were looking at me like back then Menudo was a big thing, which is a boy band group. And I looked like one of them. Maybe it was Ricky Martin. I'm not really sure, but that would be cool if it was. All that to say, all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit, I'm somebody. Like they're like, oh, the American kid, because they'd never even seen one. And you're like, how's this possible? And this would have been 81 to 83 maybe. And but the life-changing part, that was part of it. When all of a sudden I realized in a different environment, you can become a different person. So that was one subtle thing I think I caught on to. The other thing is I realized that my best day, my worst day, excuse me, I'll say it the other way around. My worst day is probably their best day ever. And where it really hit home, Jamie, at one point after being there a few months with my mom, we weren't getting along very well. We were kind of, what do you expect? I'm 16. I hadn't seen her really since I was 9, other than a visit. And we were just at odds. And this missionary came through our town, and his name was Johnny. And he was cool. He came and stayed at our house while he was, delivering God's message to the village. My mom was cool and liked him, and he was cool. But at one point she pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Johnny wants you to go with him." And I'm like, "Go with him?" And she's like, "Yeah, and by the way, he had this box truck, and inside of this thing, it wasn't a very big box truck, maybe, I don't know, 15, 16, 17 feet, but it was just a crew cab with a box on the back that he'd converted into a camper. And it had a bunk bed, so 2 beds, and a projector in the ceiling, and he would open up the side like a sardine can, like this hinge thing, and he'd hang a screen. He'd go to these villages, stick up little banners or little flyers that said, "Hey, free movie night." And these were, really bad colorized Jesus movies about finding God. And so mom was like, "Well, you should go with him." And I'm like, I was kind of feeling, 16, a little indignance and a little anger. And I'm like, "Well, hell, I'm going. Let's go with Johnny. I'm going." And the part she forgot to tell me, Jamie, is that he didn't speak English and I didn't speak Spanish. And so I jump in this truck, dude. I wish we had recording devices back then, because I can't even imagine the first 10 minutes when I went, "All right, where are we going?" And he was like, "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" I'm like, oh, shit. Oh, I spent 6 weeks on the road with him along the Colombian border. And I mean, we were checkpointed every few hours by machine gun guys with mirrors on sticks to look under the truck. Like, this was seriously dangerous stuff. And I watched a man with the purest heart, with the most conviction, and I've never seen anybody that committed to his path. And to watch him interface and interact. And then, we'd go to these villages where they were not even paved streets, like it was dirt. And sleeping in his camper, by the way, was awful because he didn't have air conditioning and there's no air. It was stifling hot. And so occasionally someone would invite us into their house and we'd sleep in a hammock with a fan. And it was like a night at the freaking Ritz. Like that fan, I remember wanting to just hug the fan like it was, the girlfriend I never had. And I just, that was the moment, man, when I went, holy cow. I felt like I struck out. And I'm like, I'm only 90 feet from a home run. I live on third base when I'm back in the United States. All I have to do is crawl home. I don't even have to run, and I win. And again, back to that whole, those people my age in those villages would trade even for my worst day. Like they'd take it in absolutely grateful heart and exchange 10 seconds from now.
Yeah. How do you keep that front of mind now, though? I mean, this is what, 30, 40 years ago, right? So how do you keep that perspective? Because you have, I mean, to your point, like, I'm peripherally at least aware of what you've done and what you've accomplished, what you've achieved. And it is, you've gone from third to home many times in many ways in your life, family wise, business wise, everything. What's up, Tribe listeners? I want to talk about our sponsor for today's episode, Gobundance, the tribe for healthy, wealthy, generous people who choose to live epic lives. It's a tribe I've been a part of for 5 years now, and I keep coming back year after year because of the quality of the connections and interactions that I get and the accountability that I get toward the goals that I'm looking to achieve. Gobundance has meant everything to me. So I'm really, really proud to sit here on the Tribe of Millionaires podcast and tell you a little bit about Gobundance. Here's the thing. Why do you live where you live? Think about it. Why do you live in the neighborhood you live in, or the apartment building you live in, or wherever it might be? Usually people move into a community because of the quality of the neighbors and all of the amenities that are available to them. And then they go about using those amenities and leveraging that community to the best of their ability for growth. They make connections with neighbors, lifelong friendships, things that serve them. We want that for ourselves, for our wives or husbands, and our children. That's what Gobundance is at the next level. Imagine if you're a man moving into a community of other millionaire men that are driven toward being the best versions of themselves as fathers, as husbands, in their health, in their relationships, in their contribution, you name it. That's what Gobundance provides. For me, it's been everything. I get with my Gobundance brothers on a weekly basis and I tell them, this is where I'm trying to go. Things I can't share with the regular folks in my life, my friends, my family that I've known forever. They only know me for who I've been. Gobundance guys, they know me only for who I'm becoming. And when I deviate, when I go off course from being that guy, from taking action toward being that guy, that's when they step in, that's when they hold me accountable, and that's what accelerates my growth. Go to Gobundance.com right now and apply. If you're a millionaire and a man, Gobundance.com. If you're a woman and a millionaire, GobundanceWomen.com. And if you're not quite a millionaire, go to GobundanceEmerge.com and you join me in the community that I've created in partnership with Gobundance to get yourself to that place of being what we call a whole life millionaire. Gobundance.com. You can start there, see everything that we have to offer. It's an incredible community. I can't wait for you to be a part of it. Now, back to the show. But how is that perspective? I don't know. How does it show up still 30, 40 years after it happened?
I mean, I think gratitude's a habit, and I think gratitude's a gift, and kindness currency. And I think that we're all mirrors, man. We're whatever you're putting out is coming back. And I kind of reprogrammed myself to recognize opportunity in things that most people walk past. And it's in the little things. It's in conversations. It's in a smile and a thoughtful gesture. And I think it's a habit. And I will say this. So 10 years ago, I committed to writing this book, Stop Settling. And in that commitment, everything changed. I think everyone should commit to being an author and writing their book, if for no other reason than your subconscious brain is absolutely eavesdropping on everything you do. And it's your litmus for right, wrong, and indifferent. And as soon as you decide you want a life worthy of a book, you start living a little differently. And in the process of committing to writing a book, I had to dig into all those stories and go, man, what has relevance that if I were speaking, to my past self from my current state, what lesson or thought or what experience might resonate that makes a difference? And so by committing to writing the book, some of this I had to dig up some dead bodies and I had to revisit some feelings and I had to go back and have some harsh talks or fierce conversations, better stated, with some people in the book, because I tell the truth, man. But I do it hopefully in loving ways. But I think the only way to become a better human being is to be more authentic and transparent and be okay with the things that are wrong. And there's nothing perfect in my world, but one thing I don't lack is gratitude. And, perspective around how I got here and that it could be taken tomorrow, which is another way to stay fresh in the mindset of gratitude. There are no guarantees.
Did you have anybody that you went back to tell them, hey, this is what I'm writing in the book about, that resisted, but you maybe still put it in the book? Did you have any challenging, like you said, fears, but did any of those conversations end poorly?
Yeah, and without going into great detail, one of them was post facto, and was a learning lesson for me. I should have had the conversation. I assumed that 45 years later, it's no longer a wound. And, here's another point, man. We're all kids running around in adult bodies trying to pretend to be adults. And we just, it's practice makes perfect, and it's never perfect. And so I it was just a reminder that a 70 plus year old person still carries that child and that regret and remorse for making mistakes. And, I had to go back and get real about, hey, here's why I did it, not what it was, in telling that story. And so, yes, there were some feelings. And the good news is we're closer because of it, man. When you expose things to light and you uncover a wound and you own your part in the mistake, because I did make a mistake in not being a little more transparent. I'm sure there's a psychotherapist waiting for me to figure out why I didn't have that conversation other than fear and uncertainty, and figured I would work on it later, which is rarely the better answer, truthfully. And then my dad gave me up for adoption. And to this day, it's his greatest regret, I think, as a parent, for sure. And we're really close today. My biological father, who I didn't even know he was my father until I was 12, 13. I was guessing, man. I asked a babysitter once, who's this guy that occasionally comes by? And her best guess, maybe he's your godfather. And it was only through asking lots of questions did someone come clean on it. But today we're tight. I sent him the book, and to his credit, and absolutely warmed my heart beyond belief, he said, I don't like it. I don't love the reality that you live in, but it's your story and you should tell it. And because of that, we both made quantum leaps, towards reconnecting in a meaningful and deeper way.
How old were you when you knew he was your father?
Probably 11.
Yeah. Okay.
Somewhere
And
around
your mom, real quick,
grade.
just cleaning up a couple things. Why Venezuela? Why did she move to Venezuela?
I don't know how many people listening have this in them, but we all want to impress and make our parents love us and appreciate us and think we're something. And for her, remember my grandfather who kicked me out? That's her biological father. And he was a hard man. He was just a difficult, hard charging, amazingly successful in certain ways, but horribly inadequate emotionally, and inability to really understand the human condition. And all that to say, he spoke 13 languages and was with Pan American and World Health Organizations. And so he would occasionally get reassigned to various foreign countries. He spoke 13 languages. It's pretty remarkable. And so after that divorce, where she was diagnosed with cancer, which at the time they proclaimed terminal, somehow she's alive. I have no idea. I wish I knew how that happened, that she's still here. And so long story short, with no one to run to, no better answer. She moved to Venezuela for a short-term visit in a 1-bedroom apartment and ended up living, I think she was there almost 18 or 20 years.
Now, this is me maybe reading between the lines of your book, Don't Know Your Mother. Is there any chance the cancer wasn't real?
Yeah, there's a chance. Now, was she sick? Absolutely. Does depression do crazy things to your ecosystem? 100%. It is. I think she was sick. It was clearly not a terminal cancer scenario, or it was a misdiagnosis. I do remember the year before the divorce, we had Christmas in the hospital, and she was. And remember, I'm 9 years old, and I'm now 57. So I had to pull up a lot of memories. And the one thing I am proud of, though, when I did go back and have that conversation you asked about earlier, and I said, if there are any factual, components of the story that's inaccurate, I will throw away the 3,000 first run of the books. And the fact is, it's very factual. And the interesting thing beyond that is that I think the human condition wants to be understood and honored, at least for the truth that they carry. And all they really wanted to do was put a bow on it and share their perspective. And although my perspective was kind of one dimensional, and I didn't want to go super deep, all I really did is cite facts and experiences that were directly correlative to my youth. There were some other things going on that I didn't know and that they felt. And then as soon as they let it go and I could absorb it and love them and forgive them, even though honestly I'd forgiven them years ago, again, it's powerful when you let go of things that you're dragging around. It's like rent-free space in your heart and your head when you've got resentment or anger or some emotion around a human being, and you're not working on it, man. You can only carry so much emotional energy. And it became obvious to me they had a lot of emotional energy that was still inside, that hopefully this was, cathartic and healthy. And I'm absolutely positive it is, truthfully.
Your mom's, is she still in Venezuela?
She's not. She lives in Duluth, Georgia. So, in fact, I had lunch with her today.
There you go. Now, dad gives you up for adoption. I mentioned at the top, that was sort of strong armed by your mom. And you mentioned it's the biggest regret of his life. You mind sharing why? Why did he give you up for adoption and, create that regret?
So I didn't know this until later. It's like a question unasked is a question unanswered, and that's another mantra I live by. Like if I'm curious or don't know, the difference between super successful and not very successful, honestly, is a willingness to ask for help. And the key operative word is ask. And so I've gone back and sort of opened up all this over the years. And I started in my 20s wanting to not have bad relationships. I knew I'll never have another biological father or mother. I'll never have at least let's reach ground zero. And so one of the things he shared was that so my mom met him in Austria I'll back up even a step before that. She was only in Austria because her grandfather was so domineering and harsh that when she was offered an opportunity to go to college, she picked Austria. He lived in Athens, Georgia at the time. That is a long way to go to your first semester as a 18 or 19-year-old female, especially in 64 and a half, 64 it would have been. So she meets my dad in line buying books or registering for class. They date a month or two, and I show up. Like, I guess they weren't thinking clearly, freshman in college having a baby. She convinced him to move back with her, where she overpromised the heck out of my grandfather and grandmother. And we've got parents and they'll take care of us. And she was just a terrified would-be 19-year-old. She was 18 at the time, and convinced him to come back to the States, the land of milk and honey. And he ended up getting an honorary degree from the University of Georgia. He's a really brilliant guy. And then going to med school in Augusta. And under the pressure of med school and learning, English at a academic level, not just a, tourist functional level like they teach in school there, it was a real traumatic time for everybody. My mom's not equipped to be a mother. Her parents, frankly, weren't great role models. And so that's when my mom divorced him, ironically, at one and a half, maybe two. And then she moves back to Athens. And then 3 years later, he's still trying to get through medical school with zero emotional or economic help. Remember, he's newly divorced, living in a foreign country, committed to a path and no resources. The only resource he had was a professor or two that liked him. Ended up getting a scholarship, finishing college, getting his residency. And at one point, he actually remarried inside of the second or third year removed from the divorce with my mom. And interestingly enough, she divorced him, I think he divorced her because she was crazy and he was rebounding to some degree and was in a very dark place. So there's the answer. He was in an incredibly lonely, dark place, which I think everybody's had those days, maybe not as bad as that. And when my mom was getting married, she was just kind of angry that, things didn't go the way she'd originally hoped and thought, and went to him and said, "You need to pay child support," of which he said, "I've got 6 months left of med school. I'm eating freaking bread sandwiches instead of hamburgers. Like I can't even put meat on it." And her response was, "I'm going to go to the courts." And she did, and had a court order that either he pay or has to serve time. And he said he just made a desperate decision in a dark moment when nothing mattered. And, he felt suicidal to some degree. And so thankfully his story gets really good, and he moves and remarries, and I have some amazing sisters. They live in New York now, and it's an awesome thing. And so that's how it happened. And to this, again, he always felt shut out. So he didn't work as hard to get back into my life because my mom basically did shut him out.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's just, I can't imagine as a father having to make that decision, but at the same time, I love your perspective on it, right? Like you're giving him grace and what he had to do to make that decision. And something you said, I love this statement that you said a minute ago. This has been showing up in my life a lot. We're all kids running around in adult bodies. And I want to take you back. You mentioned 9 years old. I want to go back to 9 years old for a minute. Because it sounds like unpacked what you needed to unpack to write this book, you had a revelation, and I'm curious when this revelation was. Like, is it now at, in your adult years that you're like, oh my God, at 9, you discovered this concept called the Pygmalion Effect, and it sounds like, from what I read, at 9 you experienced this for the first time. I think this is an important lesson, and I would love for you to just sort of dive in. Like, what is the Pygmalion Effect? Where is it based in? And what was the experience you had that demonstrated that?
So Pygmalion, it's a character from My Fair Lady. Long story short, the study goes like this. There was a group of children in grade school, and the teacher in advance of that year, and it was this case study in like the 50s maybe. And the case study was, hey, inside of these 20 kids, you've got 5 that are absolutely just, they're going to excel. They're genius. They've got capacity. You may not see it in the beginning, but we've tested all 20, and these 5 are special. Like they are. But
Bloomers, right?
yeah,
Bloomers.
you
They're
can't
supposed to
you
bloom. Yeah.
you can't they're bloomers. You can't treat them specially though. And they videoed the whole year, like literally tracked and trended the behavior. But because the teacher put energy behind it, and maybe, and I don't know if it was subconscious or conscious, or maybe there were subtle cues, but because someone believed in those 5 more than the other 15, at the end of the year, they retested. And by the way, the interesting part of the story, and this is in the book, is that all 20 were average. None of them were had any special gifts or talent, but because there was energy around the 5, they retested them, and those 5 tested superior in just about every category at the end of that year. And so my belief is that the overlay in my world is everyone needs an advocate. Everyone needs someone who believes in them, who says, you've got what it takes. And when that person shows up, if your subconscious brain, even 10% believes it, it's going to start growing a different energy than the other 90% of doubt and fear. And so in my life, where that impact really played in is, so the first time I visited my grandparents when they were still in Venezuela before they moved back to Athens, which, by the way, if any of your listeners are confused, it's okay. It is a complicated childhood, and my family tree looks more like, 8,000 bushes. And so it's not really a tree. It's lots of things. And at 10, I was sent for the summer to visit my mom, my newly adopted dad and his new wife, who was a neighbor. They sent me for the summer just to, I think, get relief. I was a little hyperactive, go figure. And while I was there, my grandmother, I alluded that they were escaping communism, and she actually lost her leg, a tragic loss of her leg. And that's a whole nother story. And she would go to these hot springs in, somewhere outside of Caracas where they were living then. And there were hot springs that were supposed, medically enhancing and soothing and good for arthritis and all that pain. And so we went to this village, and I'm 10 years old, granted. And at 10, you usually guard your kids and you don't let them run loose today. Like can't imagine telling my 10-year-old to just go out and play in but we're in a village somewhere at this little mini resort, which wasn't high dollar, but they had a pool that was a hot spring pool, and they said, go swim. And so I'm like, okay, fine. And they gave me like, I don't know, the equivalent of $1. And I went and bought a grape soda and some crackers. I'm sitting at this pool after swimming for a while. I went and got snacks, and there were 2 other people there, a couple, and they had a really small child, as I recall. And then I hear these kids coming through the jungle. Like, this is like the rainforest. And I hear them before I see them. And 4 kids pop out at the bottom of this steep hill, and all 4 jump into the pool, Jamie. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm just sitting there, doing my grape soda cracker gig. 1 pops up, 2nd pops up, 3rd pops up, 4th didn't pop up. And, I'm only 10, but I'm like, that's probably not good. And 3 swim to the edge, and they look around for their friend, and all of a sudden he starts bobbing like a cork up and down, sucking in water, screaming. And it's obvious he either forgot to swim or didn't know how to swim, or I don't even know. But I looked over at the adults and I said, man, I couldn't speak the language. I'm 10 and I'm in, Venezuela. So I'm like, you see this, right? I'm kind of pointing. The dude ran to the edge of the pool with his wife in tow, and they froze. They got to the edge, and literally like the Batman freeze gun. And I assessed a little further, and I realized they must not be going in to get this kid. So I jumped up, I dove in, and I had no skill in water rescue. Never. Why would I? Who does at 10? But all I could think to do was dive under with my best breath and lift him up so he could breathe. And somehow, I don't even know, other than I do believe in spiritual energy and that there's a God, and he gave me this superpower for all of 20 seconds. And he was ripping my hair and kicking me, and it was violent, but I got him to the edge of the pool, and the adult guy finally could grab him and pull him out. He coughed up a bunch of water, and, his eyes rolled back in his head, and then he finally flushed clean, and he was alive. And I was freaking out just by the whole thing, but I didn't even know what to think. But I went back to my grandmother's villa and my grandfather's, and my granddad, I shared it with both of them. My grandfather was pretty dismissive. He's like, whatever, because that's how he was. And my grandmother, though, got down on both knees, and grabbed me by the face and said, "You are an amazing child. You're a child of God, and he has great things for you." And I never forgot it. And my life didn't get better the next day. In fact, it got worse for the next 7 or 8 years. But I believe the Pygmalion effect is when someone believes in you and there's a positive seed planted, all you have to do is keep believing in it yourself long enough to live into it, if that's what you want to happen.
In the book, you share that story, and there's one line in there that you skipped, and I'm wondering when you had this realization, was it in that moment at 10 years old, 9 years old, or was it later looking back? But you
Later.
said, I'm very grateful that man, like, so it was sort of an interesting, it like took me for a second, because here's this man that runs to the edge of the pool and freezes and does nothing. And here you are, you're hoofing it across this courtyard or whatever. You dive in. This kid's literally, like you described, he's panicking. So he's dragging you under. You finally get him to the side. And what you said in the book is, I'm so grateful that man was there to pull him out because you were out of energy. When did you have gratitude? Because otherwise, I mean, in that moment, I would have been like, the F, dude, like, what the hell, man? Like, you make a kid come in. Were you grateful then? Did you have that feeling then? Or is that something that you've learned through practice? And as you look back, you think of it. I don't even know if you knew you wrote that. It was a subtle part of the book, but that was a striking part to me. And I wanted to explore that a little bit.
I mean, I think I was just grateful because I was depleted and didn't have I wouldn't have known what to do when I got him
All
there.
right, but when were you grateful? Were you grateful in that moment? Do you recall feeling gratitude, or is that something you've learned later and reflect back on that with
I
gratitude?
think it was later. It happened so fast. And even the words from my grandmother, as much as it was a comforting thought, it took a long time for me to believe it. It wasn't in that moment that I went, "Oh shit, hand me my Superman cape. I'm ready to roll." That
Yeah.
wasn't it at all. I was a broken child who, I'd just gone through a pretty harsh divorce and separation from my brother. I mean, things weren't great. And so all it was one notch for me and not against me. And it was one vote for me and not against me in my small brain. And my point in telling the story is that it's amazing what you're capable of under duress. And it's also amazing how important it is to have someone that believes in you as an advocate. And the reason to share it was I didn't just wake up confident that I had the skills to be anything. It just was an evolutionary experience, and gratitude kept showing up because the setback didn't cripple me and it didn't ruin
Mm.
me. And if anything, I became a little more determined to prove something. I believe that, this isn't in the book. I don't think it's in the book. It's not there. We went to, we had a dinner it was part of a Gobundance event, and it was Jeff Hoffman's event, and we donated to One Life, and we ended up spending a day or two in Cleveland and with Berghoff. And we went to dinner in this vault where I think it was at one point 70% of the world's wealth was in this vault in Cleveland. Who knew? 60 millionaires at the turn of the century lived and had their money of all places. Who knew? But we had dinner there. There were 20 Go Bros, and we're sitting around, making up BS, having fun, just being guys. We'd had a long day of, learning and sharing. So this was the social, release party. And to Aaron West's credit, and man, he's awesome. Man, I love that guy. He looks up and he goes, "Hey, enough bullshitting. What's your real story? Let's tell real stories. What's your background? How did you get here?" And we went around the table, Jamie, and everyone told their story probably took us a couple hours. And I mean, I think I cried. Every other person made me literally tear up, and I'm trying to be a, cool dude. And what I realized is most people who are hyper successful probably come from a traumatic experience that something in their DNA required, not just an option, that they step up and either prove something or, not be who somebody said they were and, there were some stories that we'd never heard, except that environment was open and safe. And so I think that, again, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. You've heard that before, but I think there's a little more to it than that. And having an advocate is such a massive gift. And
It
that's
is.
kind of what
Yeah.
great friends are for. If you have really talented, high-minded, uplifting, kind people in your world, it's not hard to fix bad days. But if you don't, the point of the book is, what do you do to self-medicate and create a
Yeah.
path that not only makes you worthy, but encourages you to go find those people.
Yeah. The story that you displayed in the book, that what you just told just now, and it goes a little bit more in depth in the book, is incredible from a standpoint of how you integrated that Pygmalion effect, like that moment where somebody advocated for you. And I want to ask you about that here in a moment as we go forward. I want to kind of accentuate this point specific to you and what I've heard from you and read in the book about you. There's a lot of gratitude. Gratitude is sort of a through line that I read and hear from you, even watching some videos you've done. And the reason I think that's important, maybe it's just where I am right now. There's an author named Stephen Kotler. Have you ever heard of Stephen Kotler?
I haven't.
So he's written a bunch of books on flow, on how to get into a flow state. New York Times best-selling books. He's actually an upcoming guest on this podcast. And he, in a book he wrote, I think it's The Art of the Impossible, he talks about the practice of gratitude and how 3 weeks, scientifically proven, 3 weeks of gratitude, if you practice that daily for just 21 days, it has shown scientifically to reduce stress, reverse ideations like depression, suicide, that sort of thing. It's a practice I put in play. I just write a page of gratitude, just one page, whatever it is, just anything that comes to mind. And it's incredible. I sleep better. I feel better as I've done this for now, I guess about 3 or 4 weeks. And I really think that, again, you wrote this in the book. You didn't mention it just now. The fact that you were grateful for this guy. I don't even know if you remember that you wrote it. I don't know. But if it's like embedded in you. And I think that's a major, at the end of the book, we'll talk about some of your success hacks, but I think it's a major hack that you've been able to leverage is gratitude. So I just wanted to accentuate that point. But let's talk about advocacy. So you are, successful. Your kids are grown. You've checked a lot of boxes. Who's your advocate today?
Man, that's a great question. I have so many allies. Like, there's a long list. So 2 years ago, I did, part of writing the book and finishing the book was that, I don't think so again, going back to my spirituality, I don't think you make deals with God or, if this happens, I'll do this. But in my mind, I kind of, one of my prayers, here's my favorite prayer: just give me the wisdom and the courage to act on it. And as I've evolved as a human being and grown, and I've learned, how to run businesses and sales manage and groom and grow, rock stars in the real estate world, that just, I've kind of checked the box and I'm like, what's the concentric circle look like? And so one of the prayers was, if I'm given the gift of passive income that more than fills my bucket and I've got margin and capacity, I will give away my day job and invest all of my time making a difference with the people that need it the most. And then I'm still self-discovering, by the way, who that tribe is. And I found a few pockets that feel wonderful. But when you say your advocate, the people that now continue to run the organization are the ultimate advocate, because not only do they love my working family like I did, and the hardest part about the transition, by the way, to leaving my role as operating partner of I had 8 offices, was the ego piece of my, this is my title. This is who I am. This is what I've 25 years. And now I'm going back to no title, blank slate. Identity is kind of a funny thing to talk about. And so I think we're mutual, it's kind of like the mutual fan club. And I've advocated for them and I've given them the autonomy to run it the way they want. And they advocate for me in a way that they still honor and respect me to bring me into conversations that matter and make me feel like I have a role, which I think I do, but they don't have to. I mean, they own the position of running the kingdom that I created, and they invite me to still share my gifts. So that's like a gift, just knowing that I'm wanted and needed. It's kind of a human thing. It's not just, and it's at every level. It's kind of like Zig Ziglar's. How do you know when someone needs encouragement? They're breathing. And so it encourages me to keep fighting the good fight, to bring something of value back to the tribe. And so they're good. My wife's an advocate too. And she's also an advocate for counterbalance, because I tend to obsess and get excited and, and I kind of put on the blinders occasionally and start running down a hallway without realizing I've left the room with all my closer friends and family. And so her advocate is making sure that my day planner is full of experiences, both with her and with the family. And that's a beautiful thing too, because that's a part of life not to be missed.
If you were giving feedback or advice to a mentee, let's say, or not even a mentee, but somebody that is up and coming, go with age, 20, 25, 30, 35 years old, whatever it might be, you would obviously give advice on this Pygmalion effect, right? The fact that, hey, you need advocacy, you need somebody in your corner.
Yeah.
I'm curious, would you say that person, would you associate an advocate with somebody that's a step ahead? Or would you associate for them an advocate could be anybody, could be somebody who's sort of laterally in your life or maybe a step below where you are? You just need an advocate. Do you need somebody that's ahead of you? Or is that not what advocacy is?
So here's the thing, in the middle of the book, what we haven't talked about is what the book delivers and what I hope to achieve with it. It is specifically, I think we did talk about the story and how I want people to resonate and recognize wherever you are, better is tomorrow if you choose better. You just have to
Yep.
make some choices, and part of this is finding advocates and role models and systems and tools, and it may be breaking down barriers inside you and some psychological damage that's been done that needs to heal so that you can grow into something better. And so that's part of it. But the belly of the book is really an operations manual for doing exactly what you're asking. And what I learned, and I went through a divorce in 2006, and it was painful. My wife decided she didn't want to be my wife. And there's nothing I could do to change that. And as an adult who's, hardwired for success and hard charging, man, it was a painful lesson that can't control everything. And I learned early on that, if you can't fix it or control it, get through it and get past it, because all it is, again, is an anchor that you're dragging around. And it's an immovable object sometimes if it's really deep in a wound. And so, long story short, what I also realized in reflecting, and it takes pain, and the valleys are what defines the peak, right? You can't really know when you're on top of a mountain unless you've drugged the bottom and know what that feels like. It's the dynamic of bottom to top that really creates joy. And knowing you climbed something worthy of the effort. And so when I reflected back during that really, really dark time, I realized I missed parts of my, like I was so hard charging in certain categories that I was neglecting part of me. And if you neglect parts of your life, it's okay to do it short term. That's called counterbalancing, where you hard charge a project, but wake up in a month or so and you better go back and put the pieces together and make sure that your relationships and your kids and your experiences and your health, that you didn't compromise to the extent it's irreversible. And so in the belly of the book, there's a whole 5-year future self strategy. And what I've learned coaching people is that everyone sets great 1-year goals. Most people don't hit them. And if they do hit them, they're very circumstantial and only, 1 in 5, 2 in 5, especially if you're an achiever and you set ridiculously awesome high goals. They don't often happen. Somewhere around October, November, December, you resign that it's not going to happen. You sulk for about 20 minutes or however long it takes you to get over your failure, and then you recalibrate and start over. And it's akin to having a 10-year career or 10 1-year careers. And I think a lot of people have groundhog year experiences. They just keep repeating the same thing, thinking somehow it's a collective, and it's not always the case. And the reason I believe that happens is they don't take a holistic approach to setting goals, and they don't track and monitor it often enough. And I also believe this: they set unrealistic 1-year goals that are self-defeating to some degree, where if you open the lens to 5 years and you recalibrate your energy and you give certain goals that are beyond 1 year's capacity, it might take 3, 4, 5 years to evolve. And you give it time to percolate and you don't give up on it. You take small steps in the right direction. Some pretty awesome things can happen. And I've witnessed it over and over. And I teach a workshop, and it's called Your Future Self 5 Years from Now and How to Make Your Life Awesome. And what I love about it, again, is it gives people the freedom to dream again and to think bigger than, holy cow, I've got a busy life right now. I don't know how I'm going to squeeze that in. Don't worry about it. If it's important, keep it on the list. If it's important, look at it every day. Your reticular activator, your subconscious brain, there's a person out there right now waiting to jump on board. And it may not be a what you have to do, but a who you need to know to accomplish that goal. But if you lose sight of it and you dismiss it, it's not going to happen. And so I'll give a quick, this was not in the book, I'm positive, because it's so sensitive. But man, you bring this out of me, and I appreciate the way you're so authentic and open and vulnerable to, the power of the simple things. Like I could pull out a spreadsheet, and you and I could probably get wizard, go wizard on X's and O's of profit and loss and leverage and all the cool stuff we know. But at the end of the day, it's a people experience, and it's a human experience, and it's evolutionary and not revolutionary tradition or typically. And when I was going through the deepest, darkest phase of my life, man, I leaned into spirituality, and I found an incredible mentor. And so one answer to your question is, it may not be a person that's great at everything. In fact, there's no one great at everything. But if there's an area of your life you want to improve, you might need an advocate that's really skilled, knowledgeable, or experienced just in that one little sliver, that one little lane. So I'll leave that there. And there's 12
Love it.
categories, by the way, when I do this future self, and it's all aspects of life. When I was in this deep, dark place, I was having some bad dang days. Like, I mean, woke up sad, went to bed tearful because I just didn't have my kids every day like I was accustomed to. And, based on what reading the book in my childhood, the only non-negotiable was I will tuck my kids in every night. And if I get home too late, I'm going to wake them up to hug them and tell them I love them. Like, I'm not going to let that generational repeat happen. And then one day, my significant other decided otherwise. And in our system, you don't have a choice. That's how it went down. Went every Wednesday, every other weekend, and rotating holidays. And so during that dark phase, though, here's the real message I want people to hear. Advocates show up in weird ways, and you just don't know. In that moment, it may not be obvious. And so I was investigating a foreclosure on a street that was not a good neighborhood. And I was selling a lot of houses. And at that time, it was, this was probably 2007, headed into some interesting markets. I saw this cat rolling up the street on a pink Huffy. He was a very large man who was wearing a jumpsuit or a sweatsuit kind of thing, had a chain around his neck. And he was about, 40 yards away, far enough away that I was not threatened, but close enough that I went, I should analyze this. And he's got in one hand a sickle or a scythe, that thing that the Grim Reaper carries around. I think it's for cutting limbs down, but it looked like the Grim Reaper. His other hand had bolt cutters and a huge chain around his neck. He's on a girl's Huffy. Anybody that's old enough to know what a Huffy is. It had
the little plastic bike, like literally the kid
it
plastic.
Was a metal bike. It was a metal bike, but it was not an adult bicycle with tassels, pink tassels on the handlebar. And he's weeble wobbling out of control, trying to climb this hill where I'm parked going into a house. Note to self, go into the house, lock the door, pay attention when you leave. I completely forgot my own pay attention rule. I went in, took pictures. When I came out, that cat was leaning on my truck with the scythe in his hand, the sickle thing. And the day before, this is the interesting thing, I'd listened to Andy Stanley, who's a local hero in the religious world. And I love the way he speaks current truth using biblical principle. He's a cool cat. And in his lesson the day before was, if someone asks, you give. That's a principle of generosity. And that, if you have the capacity, you give, and you give without expectation or it's not transactional. It's relational. It's true love. And funny enough, I'd gone to the Wendy's drive-thru with $100 bill and gotten some, I don't even know, a breakfast sandwich. And I remembered that I had, as I came out, the first thing he says, by the way, is, I need $9. And by the way, he said it in an indiscernibly difficult, drunken, drugged, and I'm like, I can't understand you, man, but you're leaning on my car and you've got a sharp device. That's a nice new truck. And could you just step over there? And, I'm trying to think logically and safety in mind. And he said again, I need $9. And finally, the fourth or fifth time, Jamie, I understood what he said. He said, I need $9. I have 4 children to feed. Now, in my wallet, I've got that, some big bills. And in my change pocket, I put away the big bills. And I think I had $6 or $4 in the other pocket loose. I pull out that and I go, because I hear my first thought was, you never pull out money in an environment. You just don't. It's not smart. My training, and working in neighborhoods that aren't safe. And I heard the other voice in my head, which is that sonar, that heartfelt voice that said, do the right thing, just to help him. So I pull out whatever it was, $5 or $6. I give it to him and I go, hey man, I hope this helps. Here you go. And he proceeds to say, I have 4 children. I need $9. And I'm like, I'm doing this whole, like, is this a test? I'm looking up at the sky for a second. Am I about to get, all right, I'm pulling out I'm doing it. I pulled out a 10. I give him a 10. I go, here's 10. Now, can I leave? I've got some appointments. Jamie, that dude's eyeballs went from freaking bloodshot, bugging out of his head to crystal clear, looked me square in the eye, and with the clearest voice I've ever heard in my life, he said, God loves you. You are special. You're going to get through this. You're just in a tough time. And I freaking almost melted. I immediately teared up. I was flat, like, I didn't even know how to respond. And then he says, can I give you a hug? And I'm like, you have a scythe in your hand. I'm not sure a hug's appropriate, but okay. Dude, this dude hugged me for 30 seconds like you'd want your father to hug you. And 2 cops pulled up right after he released, and I'm a freaking mess. Like, 2 cops pull up and arrest him. It was the weirdest alien experience. And I've never told this story in a public forum like this. And all I'm telling you now, that dude was not qualified for anything other than killing me, if that's what he chose to do, in my mind, before he hugged me. When he hugged me, by the way, that dude had muscles. He was a strong, hardworking person. I don't know what his regular job was. He was off that day, but it was hard work because, I mean, man, he was an advocate. And all it was a hug and a thoughtful reminder that my life was valuable and everything's temporary, good or bad.
Wow. That was okay. What's your belief here, though? Was that a spiritual moment? Was that a God connected moment?
I mean, I can't think any other way. How could it be? He was out of context, out of behavior. Like, I'm not making like this. You could put me on a polygraph and it would freaking ring straight across. I've never seen a human being change forms or shift like this guy did. And I can't explain it, man. That's what makes life cool. Not everything has to be explained. It's mostly felt. We're emotional energy. And so the other thing is, if you want an advocate, be an advocate, because we're mirrors. Whatever you're putting out is coming back. If you want to be loved, love more. If
that's
you want,
amazing, man.
I mean, that's the truth.
Yeah. Sorry, we got this delay on this thing, but I'm jumping in because that is, I love the way you just said that. If you want an advocate, be an advocate. That gave me a chill, to be honest with you. There's so much in that story. There's so many lessons in that story. The one thing that jumps to mind for me with this is, call it your authentic voice of God, whatever people believe, source, universe, something that speaks to you that you know to be, who you truly are, what you're truly intended to be or do in a given moment, right? But I think I'll submit that authentic voice gets very quickly, and it did in that situation, almost layered over with all this conditioning from life. Wait a minute, unsafe, sick, old, this, that. He looks this way, he feels this way. I'm in this neighborhood. Like all these are the variables, right? Yeah, they squash your authentic voice. So from that moment, or even now, do you have a practice or a way or something that you do to make sure you stay close to that voice? Because I think that voice pops up quick and then gets muted just as quickly. So if you're not listening, you're not going to hear. You're going to run. You give him the $4 and push the guy. Get away from me, bro, right? Like whatever it might be. How do you stay in tune to that voice? Because you're right. When you hear it, godlike moments happen. It's incredible. So I'd love to hear what you do, if anything.
So I think, again, it's a practice behavior, and I'm far from perfect. And by the way, the whole spirituality thing, that's a big conversation, and I don't have the answers. I just know what I feel, and I know that when I behave in a manner that reflects what I think that spiritual energy would expect or hope for me, I love myself more. I mean, it's that simple. I'm not going to cite scriptures. There's a few in the book, and some of this came from an advocate that I said, if I were going to say this, where would I find it? Because I do want to be more intellectual in my beliefs, but at the same time, it's a flow and a feeling thing for me often, and maybe more than it should, but it is. I think when you realize we're here to serve people, and that, again, that mirror thing, like it almost being unselfish is almost selfish. Like there's a weird oxymoronic relationship with givers, it just shows up over and over and over. And it's like compound interest in the world. And but it's with your heart and your soul. And here's another there's a story in the book. It's not silly. It happened. I was driving to the gym at like 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I don't know if you got this story, but The day before, there were stories on the news about this new trend in Atlanta where people were bumping cars so that you would pull over and then they'd promptly rob you and steal your car. Like, I mean, ridiculous. Like, it seems like that doesn't happen. Well, it was in the news and it was happening. And for whatever reason, it's like, I almost feel like the universe planted a negative seed so that I could somehow overcome it. And so maybe that's part of it. I'm programmed to see negative situations. And then the mind mapping puzzle part of it is, how can I twist this into something that's better or not threatening or prove myself right in listening to my soul versus my brain? Because your heart has its own, it's like a compass, but we deny it and we demagnetize it often with pre-programming from our brain. That morning, I'm parked at a light. I look over at a parking lot that, I kid you not, another 70, 80 yards away, I see a woman waving frantically with one arm with her hand on the rear trunk. And I'm like, why is she waving at me? And I bet I ran 5 scenarios, Jamie, about why she's waving at me. And of course, the news story, this must be a trap. Surely she's luring me into this parking lot. Surely. Because by the way, no other cars in the parking lot. This is an office park, not a retail shopping center. Why would you be there at 6 a.m.? There's no logic that worked in my head. I kept trying to look away, pretend I didn't see it. And I could not look back. I kept looking back. It's like going past an accident. It's hard not to look. And I kept looking and she was waving, and it was obviously a frantic wave, not a, hey, what's up? It was a please. And I finally just listened to my voice. I eked in slowly. I didn't rush in. So I'm not telling people to do things that are dangerous. Disclaimer. This is not about jumping off a cliff because someone jumped in front of you. It's caution, but at least give you a chance to research reality and recognize there could be opportunity on the other side of this perceived threat. Anyway, this lady had pulled off. This is after the fact. I pull up. Her hand was stuck in her trunk. It was one of those BMW that had an auto close. She went to get something out of the trunk, spun around and left her hand, and it had accordioned on her or her hand. Her child, a 3-year-old, was in the back seat screaming its head off, her 2-year-old. The car was running. She had been there a minute. She was going to do something and needed something out of the trunk, pulled off in a safe, open area that where she could see her. Can you imagine? And I hit the trunk release. I've never seen a happier, more joyous and loving person. Hugs me. She's like, you don't know how many cars drove past and didn't stop. And I'm like, wow. I was about half a second and one more story from driving off. So it's that if your body vibrates and resonates, at least respect it, honor it enough to pay attention.
Wow, man. Jeez, what a story. What a storyteller. I applaud you, man. These are incredible. I'm like edge of my seat here. I'm moving into the mic. So I appreciate you sharing this. Let's talk a little bit about that vibration going forward. I want to get into the belly of the book, like you mentioned. So you are an advocate. We were talking before we started recording of, the sort of like a 5-year vision. I think you and I both share, from what I read, the idea that a vision is an outcome, right? Something that you're looking to achieve. Can you delineate, though, for those listening, for me even, how do you define a vision? How do you define a mission?
I think a mission is the functional steps and what does it look like to string together experiences, where a vision is like this panoramic, 360-degree view of the world. That's just my subtle interpretation. A mission supports the vision, if you will. Maybe that's easier to take in. But I don't think it's an interesting dynamic when you think about setting your sights 5 years from now, because it's not uncommon. You don't know how, and you don't even know what, and you may not even know who. But as back to that, that subconscious brain, your subconscious brain has 2 jobs. One is to simply keep you alive. Like, okay, maybe the guy with the sickle is going to kill you, and your subconscious brain sending cues to be careful. Doesn't mean you should ignore it, but it is a warning flare and you should pay attention. The other thing your subconscious brain does is just solve riddles. It's really that simple. Like when you forget a name and you're like, and you go, hey, what's up, dude? Or been a while, cool thing, whatever your word is when you don't know their name. And then an hour or two later, you're like, oh, that's Jamie Gruber. Oh, how could I forget him? He's the most iconic, cool guy on the planet.
It's true. It's true.
It is true, but I didn't spend that hour hyper focusing. You spent about 20 seconds going, oh crap, he's walking up, his hands out. I got to shake it. What's up? And then an hour later, it's because your brain went to work on it. And so part of this book is saying, okay, so if your annual goals feel defeating and you're not really marking landmark steps towards this pinnacle or peak, what does it look like 5 years from now that your subconscious brain absorbs that as the most awesome riddle on the planet? And let it go to work finding cues and clues and connecting dots. And what I remind people when I run the workshop is that it's rarely a what and often a who that is an enabler, a role model, or maybe a business partner or someone with counterbalanced capacity or skills. And who's waiting, man? And by you trying to do it selfishly, you might be depriving that other person of their next level calling. And so there's an energy around collaboration and open-mindedness. But I lay out the whole process in it. So the vision piece of it is giving your brain a riddle other than the rap sheet that the news delivers every single day, morning and night, and going, oh my God, there's another 12 people murdered, and there was a fill in the blank, and this catastrophic. And now your brain has to process that. And so my goal is to substitute that energy for a more productive, fruit-filled energy.
How do you have a process or a recommendation on how to keep it front of mind?
Yeah, you put it on a big ass piece of poster. Sorry, I cussed, but it's kind of.
You curse more than that, and so do I. So, yeah, we can just drop it. You want me to drop an F-bomb?
I'm trying to be real. So at the end, I did this with, if you go to my Facebook page, I just posted, it's, Rick Hale, obviously. And if you do real estate Atlanta, it's inevitable you'll find me. I've been doing this a long time. But I had teens, man. And teens are my real love. And I remember I said earlier, my goal is to open up margin and I want to be an advocate for every kid that's not sure they have what it takes. And I don't want to water the weeds, or I want people who want it. And that's the hard part in trying to be unselfish and loving. But I ended up, Michael Blank, who's also a GoBro, hosted a weekend retreat. And I spent 4 hours with these kids, 16 to 22. And what's cool about it is I spent 4 hours with them working through the process and the psychology and the why it matters and getting their feedback. And it was very interactive and fulfilling for hopefully them, but definitely for me. But at the end of it, they walked away with poster size, the easel paper that's, probably, I don't know, 3x5, 3x4, with a sticky top. I find we all go to classes where we take copious notes and we go, oh my God, that Ed Milet guy is brilliant, man. And his guests, and I'll make notes, and I can't tell you where one sheet of paper from my last note is. It's somewhere in a stack or lost. But when you put something on something as big as sticky top poster paper and you put it on your wall and you commit to 5 years, you're going to keep planting those seeds of hope and that vision of potential. And to the extent, at least it's in front of you, that when something shows up that remotely resembles it, you don't walk past it blindly. And so I think part of it is, one, dreaming big in an authentic, honest way about what you want holistically in all 12 categories, and then putting it on something that has permanence and that's also shareable. So there's a piece of this that when other people know what your dreams are, you've dropped it into their subconscious brain to help you solve the riddle. And good people want to help good people.
Yeah, it does. And we're going to talk about the life wheel here in a second, because I had a question on that. But can you get really tactical with me on this? So I'm picturing the giant, tear off easel paper thing, like the giant sticky note thing. I'm picturing that. And this is relevant for me. I just had a call with my pod, and I feel like I said to them, I feel like I'm between visions. I'm in this space of I made a 3-year vision a couple of years ago. It expires this year. And a lot of it has come true. And a lot of it is that's not really what I wanted. You kind of realize you're just throwing shit in a vision to throw it there because it sounds good. But it's I don't want that. But certain things that I really wanted, they came true. They have come true, or they're on their path to coming true. But if I'm writing on this board, can you give me maybe it's something you have on yours now, or that you've seen, but give me examples of what it says. Is it like a paragraph, a word, a stat, a data point? What does this look like? Give me a word or a phrase or whatever it is that it might say as an example.
So first off, remember, you start with this wheel of life, and there's 12 categories: health, family, romance, spiritual, and charity, and there's business, there's finance, there's 12. It's everything you can imagine. That if you could make every one of those categories, you drive it to a 7, 8, 9, you're probably a happy person. And by the
Yeah.
way, earlier you said, why is gratitude important? I didn't say this. I've never met a truly grateful person that wasn't pretty darn happy. And so why not strive for that? So just saying, park that for a second. Back to the wheel.
Got it.
And GPS, by the way, so I also use some analogies in the book, like GPS. You've got GPS. If you put in the coordinates or a destination and the system doesn't know where you are, what happens? If the
Yeah.
satellite can't spot you, spinning wheel of
There's
death.
no way to go. Yeah. Nowhere to get there. Yeah. No way
You're
to
not
get
going to
there.
get
Yep.
it. So the process in the book, the operations manual, part of a life well lived now to the fifth year, starts with, what is my current GPS coordinate? Where am I holistically? And so you go through and you rate yourself 1 to 10. And then the next step in the process is to get really clear about what one thing, just one thing, could you do in the next 30 days that moves at a number to the better. And I get people to write that out. Now put that in your day planner, because if it's not in your day planner and it's not a dedicated appointment with yourself and a commitment, it's not going to happen. Early lesson in my life. And that alone makes coming to the workshop sometimes worthy. They're like, I've had this feedback. I didn't realize how simple it is to move that meter or the gauge, just a number. And that feels so much better. And I'm like, you know why? Because perfection's bullshit. Progress is what feeds your soul. You're making progress. After you've made one step, you're capable of a second and a third. So let's get your mind going, the juices going. So we go through the wheel, the step, and then, instead of going straight to where do you want to be in 5 years categorically, which, by the way, when you break it down, gets easier than going, if I just said to you on the street, we bump into, hey, where do you want to be in 5 years? The odds are you're going to go blank, because that's just such a big question. But if I said, what does your health look like in 5 years? That when you turn around and look back, you're like, I love my future self now because I made a decision 5 years ago. That's a lot easier to go. And here's the clincher. This is the absolute jet fuel that you put behind each of those perspectives, visions, and goals. What is the intention for that category? The intention is the why, because I found this, and we've all done this. We've all set our sights on something, and the day you achieve it, you're like, oh, hell yeah, I'm the man, all me, did it. New Porsche, just right color, top comes off, baby, the wind's in my hair. Life couldn't be better. And then you wake up a few months later and you're like, it's cool, eh. And so how do you avoid that? I don't know that you avoid it, because then, I've bought and sold 4 Porsches so far, because I wake up going, I think I want another Porsche. And then I'm like, I kind of like my truck. It's kind of cool. It does what I needed to do, and fill in the blank. So anyway, the long story about all of that is, what was the intention for the acquisition and pursuit of it? And does the journey inspire me? If the journey doesn't inspire you and the intention or the way you'll feel doesn't really hit home, you picked a goal like you suggested earlier, that it's just a cool goal. It's not in your heart. It's just it's an intellectual goal. It's a, hey, either me or someone in my ecosystem will think I'm a badass. And we do this like it's a human condition. I wouldn't say there's a flaw, other than if the intention is misaligned, you'll wake up disappointed and you'll have burned a lot of energy. And that energy might have kept you from some other intentions and other opportunities in the wheel of life that really mattered more.
I have one question on that, but I want to make sure I accentuate this, because I want to be clear on this personally. So two things you just mentioned in there, like buy a Porsche, live every day with gratitude. Those are two sort of, people would say, objectives or intentions or goals or visions or whatever. Which one's going on my wall? Which one's the right one to put on my wall? Not for me, but I mean, like, stylistically, is it, I'm going to own a Porsche? Or is that like, that's not a great thing? That's not a 5-year keep you going thing. Or is it live with gratitude? Or is that too general?
It might be but I think to some people it is. Like, if that motivates you and it makes you a better person along the way, I think that goes, the intention is how you feel about it. By the way, when the intention is accurate, at some point between now and the 5th year, you can swap the goals 5 times. And as long as you honor what your heart says the intention is, you win. Does that make sense? You may substitute that Porsche for 6 months off work and traveling with your family to experience the world on a cruise ship, and with a learning-based, backdrop. And it might cost the same, but it could change the trajectory of your entire family. And so, but the intention was, I want to make enough money that I can do things that matter, experiences that matter. And there's no flaw in having, material things. As I get older, I realized the things that are material that I love most are the ones I share with people. And in my world, it's like boats. We built a 2-bedroom full kitchen apartment above a garage at the lake house so we can have more family and friends at the same time. And, these aren't cheap things, but they have lasting, things that land in a trust that you would generationally want to leave, or where that's kind of where my head is now. Like, what can I do that matters, that shape shifts the people around me and gives them an experience they wouldn't otherwise get to have?
That's an amazing answer. That is actually a really, really mind-bending answer. I love the perspective of the Porsche might be a cruise. That's a great point. It's more like I can buy the Porsche, but I've grown 5 years. I'm 5 years older, 5 years more experience in life, and the Porsche isn't important to me anymore. But it doesn't devalue the vision. It doesn't mean you didn't achieve it, because you could buy the Porsche. But you
Go
just
buy
decided,
it.
well, you know what? Actually, experiences became more important to me. God knows what happens. Somebody dies in your family and it creates perspective, that kind of thing. So that is an awesome, awesome answer. I want to honor your time on this, but I want to just real quick check on one more thing, and then we'll wrap up with a question from the Gobundance card game. But on the life wheel, you talk about it in the book. It's really well laid out. Got a life wheel. It's all the way around. But one of the things you talk about is kind of rating where you are 1 to 10 on each of these.
Sure.
What's a 10? How do you define a 10?
That's an awesome question. So the short answer is we often judge our insides by other people's outsides. And so I'll give a quick example, and then I'll tell you. I'll
Sure.
just tell you, it's your relative sense of 1 to 10, not the world's relative valuation. I have a really close friend that I'm opening a couple of franchises, a fitness franchise with, and I love him to death. I've known him 25 years. His name's Rami. And if I judge my health by his health, I'm a 0. I might even be a negative number. And so that's
Mm.
demoralizing. But instead I look in the mirror and go, what is the intention behind health? Which at this point is to be pain-free, live a long life that one day I can wrestle and run around with my great grandkids and share experiences with them and not be immobile and not be in pain. That's how I define health. And to do that, though, that requires diet and health and some working out and riding my bike and doing all the things that I think will keep me alive and well. Again, it's your paradigm, not someone else's. Because if you rely on, here's the thing, you're rating yourself in one category. There's superheroes in every category. There's no superhero in all categories. And we tend to sometimes become self-defeatist around feeling holistically in a failure state, because we're judging one sliver of one person against all of yourself. Hopefully that made sense.
It does. It does. I love that. And I think something that if I've read it right, I don't know if I read it or watched it. I think that's an important point is, it's good to have your advocate potentially, and maybe I'm misstating this, check you on your rating of 1 to 10. Are you rating yourself? Are you underrating yourself, or are you setting your standard too low or too high or whatever it might be? But I think about that with like my pod and Gobundance, right? Like, when I share my life happiness, which is similar but not the same. Yeah, there's a bit of a challenge. Well, what's a 9? What's a 10 for you? And when I state it, sometimes it's like, that's not what you've just articulated before. So I think that advocate really plays in well with for when you're looking at the life wheel,
It does.
understanding, is this a 10 truly? Am I really articulating a 10, or am I articulating something below my standard?
Well, a 10 would be your ideal standard. That's that simple. When you look in the mirror
Yeah.
and go, man, if I was, lived into this or had this or did this, I would be absolutely content and not feel like I slighted my potential. That's a 10. And the
I
cool thing
love it.
is, the beauty of this 5-year thing, and one of the things I've been talking about a lot, Jamie, these days is, why not commit to writing a book? The minute you do, again, and I said this earlier, and what I found too is that whatever your 10 is, it's like climbing the first, mountain headed towards a range of mountains. You may not even see the next mountain until you peak the first one. And then your paradigm shifts again. But to hold yourself accountable to, circumnavigating the whole universe or the earth, that's just a defeating thought and overwhelming. So it's all about crafting bite-sized pieces that lead to your best version of you.
Amazing. All right, let's do this, and then I want to talk about the book. Make sure we plug that and get it out there for everybody. And I have a
Let's do
point to
it.
make on it, I think.
I
So,
appreciate it.
3 of diamonds. What is something that everyone feels uncomfortable doing from the Gobundance card game? What is something that everyone feels uncomfortable doing?
Everyone?
Every human being, Rick. Everyone, or mostly. We'll go with mostly everyone feels uncomfortable doing.
Often it's admitting, shortcomings and failures. And I think authentic transparency makes you a better human being. And I shared that with these teenagers where I think the biggest hurdle they have today is that the highlight reel in social media is an unattainable goal. And it's that one sliver of gift that one person has, likely made up and manufactured, not real. So I think it's being open and honest with where you are, and then a willingness to put your ego on a shelf to ask for help when it's a sensitive area or something that is debilitating and maybe a black cloud. And I mean, we're wired to want to feel self-confident and aware and proud. And, unfortunately, that's also a barrier to leveling up.
Yeah. The book is called Stop Settling, Finding Clear Directions for a Regret-Free Life. What's funny is we talked a lot about it, but this book is almost 300 pages, chock full, like you said, with tons of tactical stuff. I think you even said your publisher told you need to stop writing. Like, this is a passion-based book. This isn't here's a manual and something that I can maybe throw out there and maybe people will like it. I have this in me for 10 years. You've been wanting to put it in the world, and now you have. Rick, where can people learn more about it, learn more about you, follow you, wherever you want to drop for people?
Yeah, rickhale.com. So the website, and you can actually buy the book directly from a drop shipper that's part of our ecosystem. And that's awesome. So rickhale.com, you can buy a book, and I'll throw it out. If you use the word mojo in the coupon code, you get $5 off, and it'll offset shipping if you're one of those Amazon folks that has the Prime thing. So it nets out about the same. And I put more money into charities and other good things when it goes through the website. And it is available at Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Amazon, of course. And I'm about to finish up the audiobook, which it was an interesting experiment because I did it myself. I have a music, you alluded earlier, I'm a musician at heart and recorded it myself. And it's interesting so here's a tip for anyone that writes a book. Read your book out loud and record it before you publish it. As good as I hope and believe that it is, and the impact and the feedback, honestly, it's beyond my dreams. And just so you know, I was terrified the day I started handing it out. I don't care where you are. You do something you've never done, produce something that's personal. There's risk, but on the other side of that risk is the joy of being the real you that you're working towards and want to be. And but I read it, and it was interesting hearing my own words aloud, and it was cool. So that's my piece of advice for the next level authors coming up.
Amazing, Rick. I appreciate you being on, man. Thanks for doing this.
You're awesome, James. Thank you.